You don't meet the person who breaks you by chance. There's always a reason behind that rupture, because it was never just heartbreak. It was a collapse, a destruction that didn't only shake your feelings, but shattered your entire sense of self. You stopped sleeping, stopped eating, and found yourself lost in the question, who was I before that? And who am I now without? For a moment, it felt like the end of everything, like dying. But what if I told you that's exactly why it happened? What if the one who hurt you the most was never meant to stay, but to interrupt your story, to tear apart the version of yourself that was blind to the truth, to expose every illusion you'd been living under, to burn away what was false with the fierce fire of pain? Carl Jung believed that not all pain is meaningless. Some people are placed in your life not as sources of comfort or love, but as catalysts, agents of transformation. They come in the form of loss, because nothing rewires your soul faster than heart. Nothing forces you to look inside deeper than abandonment. Nothing reveals your true self like being broken wide open. The one who shattered you may have been the first to show you that you were asleep. And once someone wakes you up that violently, going back to who you were is impossible. This wasn't just a relationship. It was a rupture, one that cracked open the walls around your identity and left something new bleeding through. You didn't lose them by accident. It wasn't bad luck or fate spinning a cruel joke. Something far older and more intentional was at work. Not every relationship arrives to offer love. Some come as cosmic disruptions, collisions so precise they feel preordained, written into the fabric of your destiny. When these connections end, it's not just sadness you feel, it's a deep cosmic betrayal. It makes no sense. How could something that felt so right, so necessary, so sacred disappear, like smoke? They were everything: the late-night talks, the laughter that felt like home, the kind of connection you sensed had been waiting lifetimes to unfold. You didn't just imagine a future together, you felt it in your bones. Then, just like that, it vanished, like a dream dissolving the moment you wake, leaving you breathless and desperate for answers in the cold silence. Here's a truth most won't say out loud. Sometimes the person who storms into your life with overwhelming intensity, the one you feel inexplicably drawn to, isn't meant to stay. They are meant to disrupt, to tear through your defenses, to unearth the old wounds you buried long ago, to light a fire inside you that comfort never could. They aren't your forever, they're your rupture. And that's why the pain cuts so deep, because their presence didn't just touch your heart, it rewired your nervous system. It rewrote everything you thought you knew about love. You didn't just love them, you felt chosen by something greater than yourself. That rupture forces you to wake up, to face parts of yourself you've avoided, to question everything you believed was safe and true. It's brutal and raw, but it's also sacred, because in the shattering, something new begins to form. You are not just the person who was broken, you are the one who survived, who rebuilt, who rose from the ashes with a soul wider and deeper than before. This pain wasn't a punishment, it was a calling, a call to transformation, to authenticity, to finally seeing yourself without filters. So when the person who broke you fades away, know this: they didn't leave because you weren't enough. They left because your story was bigger than the chapter they could stay in. And you are only just beginning to become who you were always meant to be. When you were with them, it felt like finally being seen, truly understood, truly alive. Then they left. Or maybe they stayed, but withdrew emotionally, spiritually, so slowly that before you knew it, you were the one holding the weight of the relationship alone, wondering how something once so vibrant could turn so cold. You tried to fix it. You tried to explain. Maybe you begged, silently, inside your own head. Please don't go. Not like this. Not after everything. But that version of you, the one finally open, finally ready, was unheard. And in their absence, something unexpected happened. The pain didn't just linger on the surface. It sank deep, reaching the parts of you untouched before. This wasn't just rejection. It was exposure. Because their leaving didn't only leave you alone, it left you painfully aware of how much you depended on them to define yourself, aware of the emptiness that filled you without their presence, aware of how fragile your self-worth had become. That awareness, though unbearable, was no curse. It was the first spark of awakening. Carl Jung believed the universe doesn't operate on logic but on symbols, archetypes, and cosmic triggers. The people who storm into our lives most dramatically often represent something far greater than themselves. They are carriers of transformation disguised as lovers, wrapped in romance, delivered through emotional intensity. Their true role isn't to comfort but to awaken, not with kindness, but with pain that strips you bare, pain that forces you to question everything, pain that burns your mask, exposes your wounds, drags your shadows into the light, and says, look, now you must deal with this. There is no going back. You can't forget. You can't pretend. Maybe you weren't meant to forget. Maybe this loss wasn't punishment, but purpose. Because without them, you never would have looked inward. Without the breakdown, you never would have reached for something higher. Without the heartbreak, you never would have asked the most important question of all. Who am I without this person? And that's where everything begins. Not with love, but with loss. not with completion, but with cracks. They weren't the one to heal you. They were the one to reveal what still needed healing. They were the disruption, the flame, the mirror, the myth you had to outgrow. They were never meant to complete you. They were sent to shake you awake. You didn't fall in love with them. You fell in love with the part of yourself you saw reflected in them. It sounds cruel, even unfair, but Jung believed in every relationship, especially the most intense. You don't truly see the other person. You see a projection, a psychic image born from your own unconscious. They hold the pieces you refuse to face. They ignite the wounds you hide. They become the living symbol of your deepest hopes and fears. So when they leave, it feels like losing a part of yourself. But really, it's the part that was never truly yours. It was the part you were meant to shed. That loss forces you to confront your own shadow, to reclaim the pieces of yourself you abandoned, to rebuild from the ruins a truer, rawer version of you. Because heartbreak isn't just pain, it's initiation. It's the soul's call to transformation. It's the universe's way of saying, wake up, you are ready now. So when someone breaks you, don't see it as the end. See it as the beginning. A beginning that asks you to step into your own truth, to find yourself beyond attachment, beyond illusion, beyond the roles you play, because only in that space of loss can real healing begin. And only when you've lost them can you finally find yourself. It begins quiet, almost unnoticed. You meet someone who feels familiar, as if you've known them before. They say a word, flash a smile, or move in a way that suddenly ignites a spark deep inside you, something you didn't even realize was there. That spark isn't recognition, it's projection. Carl Jung explained this well. Every man carries within him the image of the anima, his inner feminine. Every woman carries the image of the animus, her inner masculine. These figures live in the unconscious, shaped by childhood experiences, culture, memories, and desires. They hunger to complete us. When someone appears who seems to embody your animus or anima, your unconscious reacts, as if it has found home, not because they are truly your other half, but because they reflect the parts of you that you've never fully embraced. You think you've met the one, but really, you've met your mirror. That's why it feels cosmic. That's why it hits so deep. Not because they are perfect, but because they are the perfect symbol. They carry your wounds, echo your hopes, awaken desires you thought were long buried. And in that projection you believe you've finally found completion. But projection is not love. It's an illusion. And every illusion, no matter how beautiful, must eventually collapse. Jung warned us, falling in love is always a dangerous moment. What feels divine is often a distortion, a construct of unmet needs. You didn't truly see them. You saw what you needed to see. Maybe you were lonely. Maybe you were lost. Maybe your inner child still longed to be rescued, adored, chosen. So your unconscious created a savior and poured that image onto this person. The problem, they never signed up to be your savior, and they could never live up to the myth you built in your mind. That's where heartbreak begins. Not because they betrayed you, but because reality did. The projection fades, the fantasy collapses, and now, for the first time, you're forced to see them as they truly are. Not a mirror, but a flawed, inconsistent, confusing human being. Real. In that moment, something inside you breaks. Not just the illusion, but the identity you had attached to it. You realize the person you loved never truly existed. Not at least in the way you imagined. You weren't in love with. You were in love with the version of yourself they helped you feel. And now, they're gone. What's left behind is not just emptiness. It's a terrifying question. Who am I without that projection? This is where true inner work begins. Because heartbreak, through Jung's eyes, isn't just emotional pain. It's the collapse of a psychic fantasy. What's left behind is the raw self. No projection, no illusions, just you. It's painful, it's disorienting, but it's necessary. Because only when the projection dies can the real self begin to emerge. And maybe that's why they came into your life, not to complete you, but to shatter the illusions keeping you from yourself. They didn't come to complete you. They came to shatter the illusion that you needed completed. They were the mirror, and when it cracked, you saw yourself. Not the perfect version, not the romantic ideal, but the wounded, half-awake, fully human, you. And that moment, that shattering, was the true beginning of Awaken. Some people don't arrive in your life to grow alongside. They come to fracture you, not gently, not slowly, but like a storm tearing through the core of your identity, leaving nothing standing in its place. That isn't a mistake. It's the medicine. Because real pain, soul-splitting pain, does what nothing else can. It cracks the ego. We've been taught to fear breaking, to avoid suffering, to guard the fragile identities we've built, our personalities, stories, our illusions of control. But Carl Jung saw this differently. He believed that only through direct confrontation with the unconscious, often triggered by pain, can the ego begin to soften, to open, to release its rigid grip. And that's what they did. Whether they meant to or not, they became the hand that shattered your shell. You didn't just lose them, you lost who you thought you were with them. The role you played, the dreams you wrote in their name, the emotional universe orbiting their presence all collapsed. And in that collapse, you met the most terrifying version of yourself, the one no longer protected by illusion. It's no accident. It felt like dying, because in a very real way, it was the death of the identity built around them, the death of your fantasy, the death of the inner child's hope that someone would come and save you. They didn't save you, they shattered you. But maybe that was the only way to save the real you, the part buried beneath all the performing, pleasing and pretending. Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." That's what heartbreak does. It forces consciousness. Before the breakup, you were still playing roles, trying to be lovable, agreeable, impressive, easy, managing perception, maybe even manipulating parts of yourself to fit what you thought they wanted. But when they left, betrayed you, or drifted away without explanation, they didn't just cause pain. They pulled back the curtain. They showed you everything you'd hidden from yourself. How much you needed validation. How deeply you feared abandonment. How much you depended on them for your identity. And that raw confrontation, looking your wounds square in the face, hurts far more than the breakup ever could. But it's also where transformation begins, because ego doesn't crack from insight alone. You can read all the books, watch every lecture, understand every theory, but the ego only breaks under pressure, under loss, under grief. And when it finally does, when the mask slips and the story collapses, something ancient and real begins to surface. That's why losing someone isn't just loss, it's a reckoning, a stripping away of everything false, a descent into the core of who you really are. And maybe that's why it hurts so much, because it's the death of the old you, but it's also the birth of something new, something unmasked, something raw and unfiltered. This is the beginning of your real self, not the one shaped by others' expectation, not the one you pretended to be, but the you who's finally awake. And yes, it's terrifying, because for the first time, you have to stand without illusion, without safety nets, without the stories that once comforted. But it's also freedom, because when you let the old self die, the real self gets space to live. And that's the medicine heartbreak brings. Not destruction for its own sake, but transformation born in fire. Some people aren't meant to complete you, they're meant to expose you. Not because they're cruel or broken, but because their presence wasn't about harmony, it was about disruption. They were the earthquake, the fire, the hammer that shattered the fragile glass box you didn't even know you were living in. You begged the universe for clarity, for purpose, for awakening. But awakening rarely arrives in peace. It comes with a scream, a final goodbye, a silence so sharp it makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. Maybe that's why they had to break, because nothing else could reach you. You wouldn't have let go otherwise. You wouldn't have looked inward. You wouldn't have questioned your patterns, your projection, your past. You would have kept pretending. But pain doesn't allow pretense. It demands your full attention. It strips away denial. It forces you into rebirth. Think about before the who were you? Who were you before the cracks appeared? Before the sleepless nights, and the grief that hijacked your nervous system? Before the silence became unbearable? You were still unconscious, lost in performance, clinging to the belief that love was something you had to earn. But they broke that not with wisdom, but with absence. They didn't offer answers. They handed you a void, and in that emptiness, you met your truth. Jung believed that the self, the deep, integrated core of who we really are, doesn't emerge until the ego breaks. And the ego does not break politely. It shatters in heartbreak, in betrayal, in ghosting, in goodbyes that catch you off guard. It breaks when you're left alone with the sound of your own breath and the echo of your unmet need. That's why they had to break, because pain was the only language your soul hadn't yet ignored. And maybe, just maybe, the breakup wasn't the tragedy. The tragedy was who you had to become to keep that relationship alive. The blessing was the break. You thought the pain would destroy you. And in a way, it did. But not the way you feared. It didn't destroy your soul. It destroyed your illusion. It didn't take away your worth. It took away the version of you that had forgotten it. What emerged from that wreckage wasn't weakness. It was awareness. This is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, by integrating the unconscious parts of yourself. And it often begins with pain. Not just pain from outside, but pain that reaches deep into your foundations, into the stories you built your life around, and tears them apart. That's what this loss did. You didn't just lose a person. You lost the fantasy that they would save you. You lost the belief that love would complete you. You lost the story that someone else could fill the emptiness inside. And when all of that fell away, you were left with something raw and real, something frightening and unfamiliar. Yourself. No illusion, no mask, no safety net. It's terrifying because you realize how much of your life was built on lies. Lies you told yourself to survive. But it's also liberating, because in that emptiness, the true self begins to take root. The self that's not defined by others' approval, or your own fears. You're no longer a reflection of someone else's expectation. You're no longer bound by the stories that once held you captive. You're becoming whole not by finding someone to complete you, but by reclaiming the parts of you lost along the way. And that journey isn't easy. It's messy, painful, and disorienting, but it's the only path to real freedom. So if you feel shattered, know this: you are not broken. You are breaking open. You're being called to shed illusion, to confront your deepest wounds, and to finally meet the authentic you waiting beneath it all. Because sometimes the greatest love story you'll ever live is the one you have with yourself. And that begins when everything else falls apart. Terrifyingly exposed, unmasked, uncertain, raw, real. That's where the true transformation begins. Because pain, as unbearable as it feels, is also the only force strong enough to drag your shadow into the light. All the fears, insecurities and wounds buried deep since childhood don't surface when life is easy. They rise only in moments like this, when love fades and silence screams. That silence, that is your initiation. Jung believed that the true self, the integrated awakened you, can only emerge when the false self dissolves. And that false self, it's built on comfort, roles, approval, protection. But when someone shatters your heart, none of those supports hold. Everything collapses. What's left is ancient, sacred, real. You start to see the breakup not as an end, but as an alchemical event, a spiritual fire that burns away all that's fake. Because spiritual alchemy isn't about turning metals into gold. It's about using the fire of suffering to transform your very being. You suffered, you broke, you collapsed, and slowly, you began to rise. Not as the person desperate to be loved, or begging to be chosen, but as someone who can sit in silence, hold the pain, and still refuse to abandon themselves. That's awakening, not bliss, not perfection, but the clarity to stay awake, even when it hurts. And then you begin to see them differently too. The one who broke you, you stop hating, you stop needing closure, you stop replaying the endless what-ifs, not because they made it right, but because you no longer need them to. Their role is complete. They were the flame, the trigger, the disruption that cracked your shell, and let the light. They were never your destiny. They were your doorway. And now, you have stepped through. You start to understand that the pain didn't end your life. It redirected it. It shattered your illusion so you could rebuild your truth. It tore away everything false so what is real could finally emerge. You don't forget. You don't erase the memories, but they lose their grip. Their myth collapses. And in its place stands something stronger than fantasy. You torn. The kind of you who doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't break at rejection. The kind of you who can hold pain without losing purpose. You become whole, not because someone handed you wholeness, but because you uncovered it beneath the wreckage of a love that was never meant to last. That's the paradox. The loss that felt like death was actually the beginning of your life. The one who broke you was the same one who revealed you not through presence, but through absence. Because only when the mirror shattered could you finally stop searching outside for a reflection that was never real. And in that stillness, in that sacred loneliness, you meet yourself. You awaken not because someone saved you, but because you finally met yourself. This time you didn't look away. You weren't abandoned. You were activated. They didn't leave you behind. They left you with yourself. And maybe that's the most powerful gift anyone could ever give you. What felt like rejection was actually redirection. What felt like being unloved was the beginning of learning how to love yourself without needing to be chosen first. You thought you were shattered, but in truth, you were revealed. The grief wasn't the end. It was a reminder you had been asleep. Your life had been small. You placed your worth in someone else's hands and called that love. When they left, so did the illusion. They were never yours to keep. They were never the solution. They were the spark, the fire sent to burn away everything false. You thought you needed them. But what you really needed was the awakening. Their absence created. Now you are not the same. You no longer see love as something to chase. You no longer see pain as something to avoid. You no longer fear silence, because now you understand that silence speaks louder than any promise. Heartbreak, as brutal as it was sacred. It stripped you. It emptied you. And in that emptiness, you found clarity. Carl Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And that's exactly what you did. You didn't run from the dark. You walked through it. You faced every ghost, every echo, every unmet need, every childhood wound. And still, you stay. That's strength. That's self-possession. That's the beginning of real love. Not the kind that begs, pleads, or breaks itself for attention, but the kind that grows from within and shines quiet. So, if you are still hurting, if you're waking up at night thinking of them, if part of you still wonders if it was your fault, if you wonder whether you could have done something different, if you fear you'll never find someone who truly sees you again, just remember this. They were not your destination. They were the disruption. And this version of you, the grounded, self-aware, emotionally honest, you could not have existed without that break. Sometimes the universe sends someone into your life not to give you love, but to teach you how to stop betraying yourself for it. And when that lesson is complete, they vanish, but you remain awake, clear, free, because now, you don't need someone else to complete the sentence. You are the sentence. You are the full stop. You are the end of your own seek. They didn't break, they broke the shell. And what came out was the self you were always meant to become. If this message found you at the right time, if it reminded you of your worth, if it whispered that you are more than enough, then know this: you are whole, you are enough, you are home. If this message helped you see your pain in a new light, if it shifted the way you understand your own journey, then you're in the right place. Here, we dive deep beyond surface healing into the raw truths that shake the soul and spark real transformation. This isn't about quick fixes or feel-good platitudes. It's about peeling back the layers, facing the shadows, and embracing the complexity of who you are. Because true awakening isn't a one-time event. It's a continuous unfolding, a patient rebuilding of yourself, piece by piece, with intention and care. If you want to explore more psychological insights that reach into the depths of human experience, if you crave stories that speak to your heart and mind simultaneously, if you're ready to step fully into your own truth without rushing or hiding, then subscribe to Psyphos. Together we'll journey through the labyrinth of the psyche, uncovering the hidden patterns, the subtle triggers, and the sacred ruptures that shape us. We'll face the discomfort and the mystery, because that's where growth lives, and we'll learn to sit with ourselves in that space, mindful and steady, learning how to be whole not despite our pain, but because of. Awakening is not a destination. It's a lifelong practice of remembering who you really are beneath all the noise and illusion. So join the conversation. Subscribe now. Let's walk this path of soul-deep discovery together.